Hi, I'm Bethany with the Ford Museum of Science and History, and we are celebrating Pi Day, PI Pi Day. But today we're actually going to be looking at the history of pi, PIE pi. Uh, and pi can be loosely traced back to ancient Egyptians around 6000 BC in the Neolithic period or the New Stone Age. And bakers incorporated nuts and honey and fruit into different kinds of bread dough. But pies, as we think of them today, can be initially traced back to the Greek. And they are thought to be the originators of the pie shell, as we think of it. And it was made by combining water and flour and would have been dried to a hardening point because it was more of a container for the filling inside, so you would just eat out of it, kind of like a bowl. The first pie recipe was published by the Romans, who may have learned how to make pie through the Greeks, and it was a rye-crusted goat cheese and honey pie. And again, these crusts were dried out and just used as the sole purpose of holding the filling, and you wouldn't eat the actual shell. I mean, you could, but it wouldn't be very tasty. Wealthy Romans even used meat pies as their desserts for dessert courses in their big banquets, and a lot of times these included seafood. In medieval England, around the early 12th century, they had something called pie, which is Pyes, and these were predominantly, they're not predominantly sweet as we think of today. They're mostly filled with meats, so beef, lamb, a lot of duck, a lot of pigeon, and they were spiced with peppers and currants and dates. And often when a bird or a fowl was being used, their legs would be stuck outside of the pie shell, and they were used as handles, which is kind of cool. I mean, we wouldn't do that today, but it's kind of cool. So fruit pies or tarts or pasties, like we think of them today, would have been first made around the 1500s. And English tradition says that Queen Elizabeth I was the first to have or make a cherry pie. Modern pies that we think of today, like pumpkin pie or pecan pie, were not part of the first Thanksgiving, which is kind of the big point of pie for our tradition. Thanksgiving pie. But it wasn't actually present in the first Thanksgiving in 1621. Pilgrims brought English-style meat-based recipes with them to the colonies. And while pumpkin pie, which was first recorded around 1675, would have been more of a British spiced squash, boiled squash kind of dish that you wouldn't eat. It was kind of just like a squash dish. And it was not popularized in the Americas until the early 1800s. Historians don't know all the dishes that the Pilgrims served at the first Thanksgiving feast, but primarily documents indicate that Pilgrims cooked with fowl or birds and venison. And it's not unlikely that some of these meats found their way between dough and at some point, so some sort of pie crusted thing. A lot of these pies are open faced too. We will not like we think of like having as like an apple pie or a crusted pie on top, but a lot of these would have been open faced. Similar to the Romans, colonists did not eat the crust of their pies. They actually were designed to hold the filling and were used as a preservation method. This is when the pie covers would have come into play as a lid sealing kind of mechanism that they would use to preserve their food, fruit or whatever it is at the time that they would have put inside meats. A lot of those would preserve so that they could hold them and eat them later in the winter. And then colonists cooked many pies. They cooked their pies in long, narrow pans. If you kind of think of a bread tin or a bread pan, that's kind of what they look like. And they were called coffins because they looked like a coffin. They didn't make a lot of bland pies, actually. They actually used a lot of fruits and cinnamon and pepper and nutmeg to season their meats. So they were very savory but spiced dishes, so they were tasty. As the colonies spread out, pies actually served a role as a way to showcase the produce and ingredients that were localized to the areas that they were at. And it came to be, this is where sweet pies as we know them came to be kind of a staple. A cookbook from 1796 was the first to list sweet pies, and there's only 3 listed in this cookbook. There's another one written in the late 1800s that finally made it up to 8 sweet pies, and by 1947, the Modern Encyclopedia of Cooking listed 65 different kinds of sweet pies. Pies were used even as a form of entertainment. Animated pies were very popular throughout our history. If you've ever heard the nursery rhyme, Sing a Song of Sixpence, there's a line that says 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie. Refers to animated pies because it was actually a thing. Pies were used as a kind of covering for birds. They would kind of make a small little pie, and then they'd make a covering pie base with a hole cut out to put birds in that would be around the actual pie that you would eat in the middle. And so you would take or cut open the top layer of the pie crust, and the birds would fly out and sing and do their thing. But they were not the only animals to be baked into pies. They would have rabbits and frogs and turtles and other small animals, and even people were placed into these pies as a form of entertainment. When people were taken out, usually it was them or them and animals. And when they popped out of a pie, they would walk down the tables that the pie was served on, and they would sing or dance, sketch guests, and even do tricks. And this is said to be where the ceramic pie birds that we know of today, that let out the steam in the middle of a pie. You have a little ceramic pie bird, and you stick it in the middle of the pie, and steam comes out to help it not crack the crust. And this would represent the birds that would fly out of the pies that were animated pies and used to showcase. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Pie Day celebration, and we hope to see you soon at the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History.